attending to this afternoon. We are, at least the news has been saying, we're expecting weather at some point in the next few hours. Just be mindful in the event that the skies change on us to head to the safest places in this building. I don't know what that is, but we'll follow that direction, certainly as low as possible, right? As low as possible.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Monuments are often coded in our popular imaginary as relics of the past, artifacts to revisit as a means to capture and edify a collective experience, an understood sense of identity and selfhood, or a shared narrative. Put plainly, it reminds us of a good story. Public art, monuments, sculptures, and installations that are meant to exist in open spaces differ from the immersive experience of the museum. As Marilyn Robinson puts it in her foreword to the catalog In Time of Witness, published by the University of Iowa Stanley Museum of Art, there is, quote, deep affinity between art and a museum of art because both celebrate the rewards of attention. Both are a proof that we live in a world so full of beauty and interest that these rituals of display are needed to awaken us to our wealth, end quote. One could believe, rather optimistically, that art in public spaces welcome a similar experience, one that can serve multiple functions while also giving the reader a context that allows for the experience to educate and contextualize whatever figure might be presented. This, however, feels like an incomplete relationship with art. While museums, galleries, and other interior spaces demonstrate and celebrate a certain regulated wealth of beauty, art that occupies the public space Art that occupies the public space, while assuming multiple roles, often falls well short of our hope that art be a powerful testament to the act of witness. As one of our guests tonight, Irvin Weathersby Jr., puts it most elegantly in his book, In Open Contempt, Confronting White Supremacy in Art and Public Spaces, quote, in a way, monuments accelerate forgetting, a dementia of sorts that gradually worsens as the years pass until the before eludes all recollection. They may appear to underscore the past, but in the process, they suppress other events and stories that shaped the commemorated life and space. Rarely are they found with enough context to leave us with a comprehensive image of what life meant then and what it means today, end quote. This abridgment, certainly anticipated by the artists, positions an imperative of sorts to challenge the very notion of the creation myths we tell ourselves. Ultimately, what Irvin Weathersby Jr. attempts to unpack in the book is a question of agency, accessibility, and representation. Weathersby Jr.'s journey following these sculptures across the South, across the Atlantic, and into the Dakotas bring to mind a passage in the book that depicts an interaction with a Native American painter working in plein air near the Crazy Horse Monument. Upon engaging in a conversation, the painter tells Weathersby Jr. that, quote, Crazy Horse was absolutely important to our legacy, but who shapes it matters because they will determine what it ultimately means, end quote. When thinking about art in public spaces, or the artist and their responsibility, Elizabeth Catlett becomes a central figure to the discourse. As Catlett puts it, public art is, quote, only valid when it has some relationship to the community. It is not good enough to be merely functional or even beautiful, end quote. Catlett serves as a prime example of the approach many artists have when creating art meant for public spaces, its function being site-specific, relatable, and ultimately needs responsiveness on behalf of the spectator. We can see such examples of Catlett's public oeuvre in her depictions of the floating family found in the Legler branch of the Chicago Public Library, or in the bronze casting memorial paying homage to Ralph Ellison's canonical Invisible Man found on Riverside Drive in Harlem, New York. In a cultural and physical landscape that is ever-changing and often uncompromising in its relentless brutality, an artist must navigate. An artist must often tether multiple purviews in order to arrive at a place of organic beauty. I think of the works of Sid Carpenter and her technical mastery of ceramics, but more deliberate, her claim of, quote, family as a constant source of inspiration both as image and encouragement. I think of Faith Ringwald's contributions in both painting and textiles, her famous narrative quilts. We see this material dexterity as far-ranging as her oil paintings as seen in They Speak No Evil from her 1960s series American People, but more intimately, her use of fabric and textiles, as example in Ringwald's Street Story quilt, tie the artist to a longer thread of history, often familial, Even prominent painters like Mark Bradford began with this material experimentation, with his early implementation of end papers originally used to protect hair from burning transposed onto canvas. Through the same artistic lineage and method, the artist DeJeonge Reese considers the critical intersection of archiving, both as a cultural practice, but also as a narrative praxis that negotiates the legacy and varied histories in the Black experience in the United States. Here today, we are fortunate to host both Irvin Weathersby Jr. in conversation with a brilliant practitioner in her field, DeJeonge Reese. DeJeonge Reese is a visual artist and educator from Yeadon, Pennsylvania. She holds degrees from the Lincoln University of Pennsylvania and Moore College of Art and Design. Working across mixed media, textile, and fiber art and performance, Reese explores the rich cultural, spiritual, and social narratives embedded in Black hair and culture. Drawing from her personal natural hair journey, ancestry, and historical research, she approaches Black hair as a living vessel of history, memory, and identity, using material experimentation and storytelling to bridge past and present. Her work challenges dominant perceptions while celebrating resilience, pride, and the enduring legacy of Black identity. Reese's work has been exhibited throughout Philadelphia and New York, including at the Philadelphia International Airport. She's a 2023 recipient of the Mural Arts Philadelphia Black Artist Fellowship and has participated in several prestigious artist residencies. Irvin Weathersby Jr. is a Brooklyn-based writer and a professor from New Orleans. His writing has been featured in LitHub, Guernica, Esquire, The Atlantic, EBONY, and elsewhere. He has earned an MFA from the New School, an MA from Morgan State University, and a BA from Morehouse College. He has received fellowships and awards from the Voices of Our Nation's Arts Foundation, the Research Foundation of CUNY, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the Mellon Foundation. I invite everyone now to share in our moment and join me in welcoming Reese and Weathersby Jr. to Notre Dame for what I know will be a critical examination and conversation of art and race in the 20th and 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you for being a little patient here. Got a little turned around here on this massive campus, but it is beautiful. It is beautiful. And thank you for being in community and conversation with me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So what I'm going to start with, I'm going to read from a passage whereby I engage with a Kara Walker sculpture. And so I'm just going to toggle to that so you can see that here. There we go. Really quick here. Okay, sorry. All right, so this is the image that I'm engaging with here, and I saw this on the last day that it was exhibited in New York City. So I'm going to read from chapter that is titled "The Deities of Water and Canebrake," whereby you'll see. I get into this here. The deities of water and canebrake. Mother, I need your blackness now, as the August earth needs rain. Audre Lorde. The first post from Domino's Park Instagram account describes Williamsburg newest park, located a few blocks from where I was arrested. Its feed features images of a playground, toddlers walking hand in hand, dogs in various stages of repose and activity, outdoor yoga classes, Zen gardens, soccer games, butterflies, sand volleyball courts, and sunset silhouetting the Williamsburg Bridge. A few comment on what the space used to be, capturing the cranes and gears and storage tanks of the old sugar factory in stylized frames that evoke nostalgia. One since deleted image, captured near the factory's brick facade, angles up the face of the building and produces a towering perspective of what it looks like to stand directly in front of it. The result is stark and foreboding. The caption reads, quote, "The Domino Sugar Factory at one point produced 95% of the sugar consumed in the U.S., part of the reason we're proud to call the namesake our home." Missing from the description is an acknowledgement of sugar's role as a driving force of the slave economy when the factory opened in 1856. Another post shows an old ad featuring a factory worker, a white woman in an industrial dress and gloves. She inspects a box of sugar in her hands as others line a conveyor belt. The caption focuses on the employees, 4,500 in total, who unloaded, purified, granulated, and packaged the product into the, quote, iconic white and yellow bags and boxes that are still on shelves today. As if concealed by a sugary glaze, the feed is filtered so the viewer forgets what once was, mirroring the effect of sugar on the mind. When we ingest sugar, dopamine floods the brain's reward centers, causing a euphoria so addictive that it can surpass the psychoactive pleasure we receive from sex and drugs. Its overconsumption even affects cognition, making it more difficult to learn and remember, an effect fitting for its role in the transatlantic slave trade. The pursuit of table sugar paved the path for centuries of bondage and memory loss. Sugar is what made the slavers in and around New Orleans rich, for its emergence along the German coast and throughout Louisiana filled a gaping void after the liberation of Haiti, once the world's largest sugar producer. It's what allowed P.G.T. Beauregard's family to send him to West Point, where he learned strategies that would earn him military distinction in imperialist conflicts waged throughout Mexico and the South in support of slavery. It's why Cuba and the rest of the Caribbean islands had such a symbiotic relationship with New Orleans, each island essentially an agricultural colony purposed toward the cultivation of trade and sugar. John Noel Destrehan, a French slaver who became wealthy on the German coast, is credited with revolutionizing the process, generating yields America had never seen before. By dividing the labor into three groups of harvesters, transporters, and processors, he worked enslaved Africans 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and, quote, doubled the work of 40 to 50 workers without overworking any of them. As noted in American Uprising, the untold story of America's largest slave revolt by Daniel Rasmussen. Yet sugar work was grueling and earned the dreadful reputation associated with being sold down the river, where enslaved Africans worked longer hours, faced more brutal punishments, and lived shorter lives than any other slave society in North America. In 4 years of sugar harvesting, an enslaved African returned his master's original investment and produced profits that sparked the internal slave trade that exploded in the 19th century. The history of America, as a result, can be traced by a path coated with sugar, following the ratification of Louisiana statehood, the invasion of Spanish Florida, the annexation of Mexico, and the systematic decimation of native populations. These conquests more than doubled America's size and thrust the country into its position as the world's most powerful empire. Before Domino Park was repurposed as the site of one of New York's newest architectural feats, the factory was a vehicle for slavery. Before Williamsburg became one of the most rapidly developed neighborhoods in America, Kara Walker sought to remind us of the factory's legacy. The first few images of the feed still highlight images of Walker's sugar baby, but none mentions the word slavery, the direct reference to the trauma, loss, and ellipses. The full title of Walker's confection reads, A Subtlety, or The Marvelous Sugar Baby, an homage to the unpaid and overworked artisans who have refined our sweet taste from the cane fields to the kitchens of the New World on the occasion of the demolition of the Domino Sugar refining plant. I saw the sculpture on the last day of the show in 2014, before it would be destroyed, before the Domino Sugar Factory would be raised and the waterfront condos that look out onto Manhattan would rise in its place. I had wanted to see it earlier, but when I first tried, the line stretched for blocks, the wait over 2 hours. The stench smacked you first. The acrid, sour odor still thick in the air after decades of sugar processing. Looming in the background, 100 yards from the entrance, sat the sculpture, with its white surface coated with 160,000 pounds of sugar, radiating from the sun, piercing through the skylights. It was massive, the biggest sculpture I had ever seen. A mammy, fashioned as a sphinx with full lips and nostrils, her head covered by a bandana, her breast and buttocks not just exposed but inviting, her nipples erect and ass raised in a way that said, "Take me from behind." I was humbled, the way I imagined it would feel to walk before the pyramids of Giza and feel dwarfed by their size and significance on the timeline of recorded history. The subtlety, a term for elaborate confections once used as ornaments and placed on antebellum dinner tables, represents the culture of excess and symbol of wealth made possible through the labor of the enslaved. The factory, once the largest sugar refinery in the world, now housed a 35 by 75-foot sculpture that married the tangled histories of rape and forced labor into a symbol of the women who nursed America to dominance. Although it was the first sculpture in Walker's body of work, it fits perfectly within the scope of her signature silhouette motif, which on first glance obscures the perverse details of her antebellum narratives. Upon careful inspection, you are likely to be disturbed by images of sodomy, decapitation, fellatio, and other unseemly acts. To experience her work, then, is to be overcome with emotions that are at once visceral and alarming. I expected this much from Sugar Baby, desiring to be made uncomfortable but no less appreciative of her rendering of history. I didn't expect to be overcome by such an intense sadness. No. Overwhelmed by an urge to look away, to cover the mammy's body and shield her from inspection. This time, the message was too much to bear. Maybe Cummings, the founder of the Whitney plantation, was right. Maybe there are some images that we should never see. But what if Walker wanted me to look closer, to see the resin that had fused the parts of the polystyrene sculpture, and imagine the weathered fissures of a marble monument, one that had withstood the decaying effects of nature to proudly honor the unceremonious role that our ancestors played in nursing white supremacists. Maybe she sought to create the largest public sculpture New York has ever seen to honor the wishes of Charles Stedman, a North Carolina congressman who, on behalf of the Jefferson Davis chapter of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, introduced a bill in 1923 to erect a mammy on the National Mall, a few blocks from the Lincoln Memorial. Without a shred of irony, Stedman argued before the Senate that the monument, quote, should find a responsive echo in the hearts of the citizens of this great republic, to commemorate the life and memory of the faithful slave. One model of the proposed statue captured a mammy holding a white child while two black children clung to her dress. The final design that Stedman and other supporters decided on was the image of a mammy cast within a column fountain, sitting with an infant clung to her breast. A petition of 2,000 black women had implored Vice President Calvin Coolidge to thwart the bill. I considered assuming Walker's voice, one that seemed to scream, "Fuck you," the epithet evident in the archaic gesture of the mammy's left thumb jutting through her index and middle fingers. But I felt more violated than enraged. While some patrons took playful selfies that framed their smiling faces next to the sculpture in the foreground of their photos through cleverly orchestrated optical illusions, I struggled to fight back tears. In conversations with artists and curators days after the show, I heard many of them say that Walker should have left the mammy in the past, that at the end of her career, her retrospective will be mired in vacuousness, the result of ingesting the same image over and over. I submit to some of these claims, but the power of the Sugar Baby lies in its temporality, since the trauma it elicits was never supposed to last, as impermanent as the sculpture itself. This is the core of its brilliance. In form and execution, Walker captured the psychosis of America, how we can be drawn to empathy, but only for a spell, only until something else diverts our attention. To this end, all that remains of the sculpture is part of its hand, after Walker realized that peering into his face would likely be too haunting. For who in their right mind would want their yearning for sex and the rush of a few teaspoons of sugar complicated by thoughts of slavery? Did Walker go too far? Is there a limit to what we should see and immediately learn about slavery? Do we need such reminders that call attention to the centuries of injustice? These questions presuppose a blindness to the reminders that exist everywhere we look. Unpaid black labor still has not reached the American consciousness. But consider what might happen when we learn to see the results of the transatlantic slave trade everywhere we turn. How they can be found in the origin stories of our schools, our banks, and our institutions. Virtually every system that defines our society. Every American ideal can be traced back to the beginning. But like the unmarked graves of enslaved Africans in Lower Manhattan, where the epicenter of our economic engine continues to reign, it's easy to overlook the first commercial trades that brought us to these shores. Thank you. All right. Light reading. So, is this on? Do we need this on or no? So, should we use this or no?
You should.
We should? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So, as we talked about this book here and engage with these spaces, you know, I was really overjoyed to kind of engage with your work and see how we're having some of the same conversations. And so I want to start with the space of the Black woman and her place in art, whether she's the subject or the creator, and how that informs your practice.
Well, I definitely feel like it's a little bit of both. I feel like as a Black artist, a Black female artist, I'm very much still fighting and searching for places where my work belongs, where it is accessible to all, but especially more people that look like me. Being a Black woman can be complex in a very beautiful way, in which it can be hard to kind of feel comfortable enough to take up space, or knowing what spaces are okay to take up, if that makes sense. So like, I know for me, I've been in a lot of predominantly white institutions showing my work, and it gets a very different reaction than when I'm more around an audience that looks like you and I, in that sense. But I think it's a little bit of both. I'm still finding, I feel like I found my space, but also I just feel like as Black female artists and other Black female artists that I know, it is a struggle to find a space that is going to genuinely accept your work for what it is and how it is. And I'm thinking about Amy Sherrill now and her recent removal of her piece from New Washington.
Yeah, so Amy Sherrill has this really fascinating kind of piece that is, I forget the name of it, I think it's Transforming Liberty, is that the name of it, I think? And it's a trans woman in the posture of the Statue of Liberty. And our president, maybe your president, I don't know, he's not my president. He's not my president, but someone's president. Has decided that that was too controversial to be kind of shown, right? DEI, anything that doesn't look like, you know, white maleness, I guess, is inappropriate. And so Amy Sherrill decided to take this piece to Baltimore, her native Baltimore, and now it's being shown with several of her other pieces, and the show has been sold out for months. And so people are yearning for these spaces, yearning for this conversation. And so even thinking about what she's doing, what Kara Walker's doing, how do those artists kind of inform
your practice? Do they open space for you? Are you trying to be in communication? What do you think about, in some ways, the boldness of it all, you know? Because, I want to get to your quilt making, and I want to know how that is also a revolutionary act as well. But I want to think about, like, how do you engage with them and all of those powerful women doing some incredible work. Amy Sherrill, of course, also did Michelle Obama's portrait for the National Portrait Gallery.
Yeah, so for me, I'm very inspired by Kara Walker. I saw one of her pieces at the MoMA for the first time when I was in graduate school, and that really just kind of opened my eyes. I think it was one of the first times I saw a Black woman who's still alive, who's still actively practicing, and seeing her work in person and how massive it is, how it like just took up the entire room. Because, when you see a picture of it, it seems like it's just like this little cutout silhouette until you see it in person. And it's like the entire room would like take up her art. Her, Sonia Clark, Sid Carpenter, and they definitely opened doors for me, because being able to see people like them be able to have their pieces in the MoMA, be able to have their pieces, be able to have that power to pull your piece from one show to put it somewhere else where it'll be accepted, definitely feels like it opens doors for me, because that's where I like to see myself. That's like has been my ultimate goal in my art career. And growing up, I didn't know anyone who looked like me who was doing art at this level at all. And I really shied away from doing art in general altogether. None of this almost happened if I would have stuck with a whole different path. So being able to see women like that definitely opens doors for me and lets me know the possibilities of where I can go, as long as I continue to be okay with taking up space, like all the space.
Yeah, no. So it's about taking space. It's about not even taking up space, reclaiming your space.
Yeah.
Like this is, from the Sugar Baby, we see that Black women have been here forever, and not just in the background. Like they have been formative and foundational. And so I want to talk about my book. In many ways, it's about my ancestors. It's about all of us as Americans. But it is dedicated to my grandmother, and so like I lead with that idea when I'm writing. I'm trying to write to her and what she's kind of given me. I wonder, like, in terms of like your quilts and like the work that you make, how are you honoring your ancestors? How are you communicating with them? What is that relationship?
Well, it took me a while, but I didn't realize that so many of my ancestors were quilt makers or seamstress in that way. And when I came into textile art, it was first solely focused with synthetic braiding hair. And then it grew into quilts over time as I was introduced to more people who were making quilts, like more quilt makers. Like when I first was at my residency at Airmont School of Arts and Crafts, I was invited as a participant for textile art. And at the time, I was solely only making these wearable masks out of African braiding hair. And they were like, come be a part of our textile group. And I'm just like, oh, that's what I'm doing. So by the time I got there and I'm with all these predominantly white group making quilts, it just had me really start thinking like, okay, let me dig deeper into the history of African American quilt making. And the more I dug into that, and the more I was also simultaneously digging into my own family history, the more I realized that I feel like my ancestors are like sewing with me, especially because all of my pieces are hand stitched. So it's like they're sewing with me, through me. I often tell people like a lot of my ideas for my pieces come to me like almost like a vision or a dream in a sense. And I will have a very clear picture of what I want a piece to look like before I even sketch it, jot, or anything like that. So I do feel I'm very connected with my ancestors. Like I still go and visit their graves. I still have connections with their places they used to live and things like that. So it is a very like spiritual practice for me.
And so when you are creating, it's more than the physical product, right? There's something
Exactly.
that you are experiencing, and so honestly, that the way you kind of talk about that is the way I've kind of reacted and responded to some of the art that I talk about in this book. I want to go to another image for you guys to kind of illustrate what I mean here. So this image is a relief that I saw on the side of a street, a bustling street in Paris in 2016. And this is blown up here, but it's just looks like this, and it's a relief that is on the side of this residential building. And I was planning to go to the Louvre. I was with my wife, and we were saying we're gonna go have a wonderful day of exploring art and the city. And it's early in the morning. My wife is going to get some meds. Her allergies were acting up, and I walk outside, and I'm really just overjoyed, really excited. It's my first time in Paris. I'm about to engage with art. And then I see this, and it ruins my day. It does, because I'm looking there, and I'm like, well, what is this? And I don't, I didn't speak French then, but it was like, I don't need to speak French to know what's happening here. And this is clearly a scene from slavery, and it just blew my mind. And this is where this image really is how I got the idea for my book. This is the notion that this whole notion of an open contempt comes from a Frederick Douglass quote, whereby he recognized that he was going to be sold on an auction block, and he laments, how are we reduced like beasts and swine, held in open contempt of our humanity. And so I've had so many moments like this in this book where I'm accosted by these images of white supremacy. And so I wonder, just even thinking further about like inspiration, like how do you find inspiration in kind of the world and, beyond necessarily your ancestors? What are you engaging with? What is causing you to say, hey, you know what, I need to create something today, or I need to grapple with this?
A lot of it comes from personal experiences for the most part. So I even started working with synthetic hair mostly because I went to Lincoln University, which, if you don't know, was the first historically black college. And I was a part of the majority. So it wasn't until I went to graduate school at Morehouse College of Art and Design where I was the only person of color in my class. So I had kind of that like reverse experience. And during that time, I also decided I'm going to lock my hair. And it was becoming one of those things where, if you don't know, when you sometimes start locks, they can be very small little coils, and it's like a whole quote unquote awkward stage. Yep. And being in that stage while I'm at this PWI, you get lots of questions, lots of side eyes, those kinds of things. And it just really started making me question what it means to be a person of color in these spaces, but also made me start questioning my own identity and how I present myself in these spaces. Like, am I going to conform myself to kind of like, look more like my classmates or act more like them, or am I going to take up this space and just like, I'm going to rock my hair how I want to rock my hair. I'm going to, things like that happen for me, and then I start to just question things throughout my own experience, and then it just kind of makes me dive deeper and deeper and do research into more and more things. So it starts with like a general question of something I might come across or might happen to me, and from there I'll start a general research, whether it's in a book or a Google search, and just start down my own little rabbit hole of things.
You know what I love about that approach is that you started with the self, right? And it wasn't necessarily to produce anything versus, or I guess, produce anything external. Mm-hmm. What you're trying to produce is self-worth, mm-hmm. right, and value. And I think that is really one thing that's really awesome about your work, and thinking about like, first you start with self, and then like, how do I start engaging with this in an external way? And I think that's a wonderful way of thinking about it, like leading with oneself and figuring out how do you find yourself in place. I had a similar experience in my graduate program, my MFA, but it was the reverse, mm-hmm. whereby I had been growing my hair. I had locks before I was thinning and before I got old and had kids and grade, but that's beside the point. When I was a young man or younger man, I used to have locks, but I was in this all-white space in these classrooms, and I felt myself losing a sense of self. And unlike you, I decided to cut my hair. And I was like, you know what? maybe it is time, maybe I rationalized it, maybe there were some conscious things that were happening there, but I was trying to figure out, well, how do I find myself in this literary landscape when no one looks like me, right? Do I regret it? Not necessarily, but I do remember it and being very conscious of like how to construct one's identity. So I wanna ask another question, go into another piece here, based on this notion of taking space, and another wonderful Black woman artist, Simone Lee. So this piece here was a temporary sculpture, another temporary sculpture that was installed at the base of the former statue to Robert E. Lee in New Orleans, my hometown, right? And so the city has now decided to reclaim this space. It's called Harmony Circle. But this piece that she created was called Mama Wata. And one thing that I enjoyed about it is like Mama Wata is an African deity, right? And is really important to, in so many different ways, in terms of the cosmology of African religions, Yoruba especially, and thinking about being the goddess of water, right? And so this was significant in why it was placed here in New Orleans being decimated by water. It's on the Mississippi River, which is the conduit to the transatlantic slave trade. Very significant. All the symbolism is there. I got that. But there was no context there for other people to see. And so I was really troubled by that, right? And so I wonder, like, how do you think, representationally, art should kind of inform, educate? Do you think that is for the artist? Is that for the public? Do you think about those questions when you're creating pieces with hair or you're creating quotes? Is it your responsibility to educate them of what they're seeing?
I would hope, I go into my work with a storytelling goal. So with my work, it's about taking this kind of narrative or stories that I've researched and found and forming it into this physical idea of a piece. And the general hope is that people will take away from it, that they will be able to reflect, that they will be able to learn something from it if they are unknown to it. I don't expect everyone to go up to my piece and learn something. I will kind of, depending on where I'm showing it, I'll put like a little blurbs just to give people a sense of what the work is about. But I have audiences who will walk up to my work and they're like, I know exactly what that is. But then I also have people who need further description of what it is, and that's most likely people who don't look like me. So I don't think it's my responsibility, but I'm not mad at it if they, learn something.
Got it. So you're like, look, yes, I want you to feel something. It's not my responsibility to tell you what to feel.
Exactly.
But it reminds me, it brings up this idea that was brought up by Elizabeth Catlett, and how do you wrestle with that? She's like, look, all art is political. So, like, but it also has to be beautiful. Mm-hmm. But what is that balance? And as you answer that question, I'm gonna go to one of your pieces here that really moved me here.
Ew. So yeah, these are one of the pieces that, one of my wearable masks, elephant masks. So it was inspired by the African elephant mask, which is known to be a mask worn for royalty. It often had lots of beads and adornments on it that was made for people higher in the tribe. And I was thinking also about how hair at one point before slavery, how you wore and styled your hair would represent what tribe you were from, your rank in the community, your marital status, whether you were a warrior, a widower, a child, etc. And I just kind of wanted to combine those two. So that's kind of where this mask came from. But I also, at the time, was thinking about Black hair in the workspaces, in corporate spaces. So I'm thinking about like the Crown Act and how people tend to get shunned for just their hair, the way their natural hair grows. And I think about the time my father wore braids and lost his job for making that such a change for his hair. And the fact that that's still a thing today, that we're still actively fighting for the Crown Act to pass in multiple countries because of the way our hair just naturally grows out of our body. And we're still kind of pressured to conform to it. So this image was actually taken by a friend of mine, but it was actually my cousin who is a creative director. It was her idea to kind of have this kind of effort moment in the workspace. So, you know, just the throwing of the paper, just kind of like, I'm going to wear my hair how I want to wear my hair proudly in whatever space I'm in. And it's just something very beautiful about just like having that acceptance and yeah.
So that ethos is already embedded in your work.
Yeah.
Which is like effort anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of where I come from. I'm proud of everything I've done to get to this point, and it's just something very beautiful. And like just knowing how much our hair has represented before and how much it represents us today, and still has such an impact on society and our identity of both self and as a people.
And you know, thinking about hair and Black women's hair, I think we can think of all of our heroes and their hair. And like when we talk about Angela Davis, right? Mm-hmm. Alice Walker, right? Toni Morrison, all of these wonderful figures, you know, who decided to say, hey, look, this is the way my hair grows out of my head, and this is how I'm going to respond. And whether or not, you know, Angela Davis, I think, is pretty obviously political.
Yeah.
But the other circumstances are as well.
Yeah. I feel like I'm unintentionally political. Only because, like I said, a lot of my work is based on experience. And at the time when I was locking my hair, I was working at this prominent museum in Philadelphia. Yeah. And I was nervous to go back to work. And because at the time I started wearing head wraps a lot, in that very, you know, awkward stage. So I just started taught myself how to wrap my head wraps, you know. And so I'm going to work, and I'm already tall, and like so just tall Black girl, and then tallest Black girl in there, and then add another layer, another couple inches of a head wrap, and it's like very much me taking up this space now and being unapologetic about it. Yeah. And it's just one of those things I just started to come into, but it was also very unintentional. Yeah. Like I wasn't in the back of my mind making things like this is going to be political and it's going to like, you know, any of that, but it's just like something it's just more like a message or an idea I'm trying to convey or trying to bring to light or shine light on, and it just happens to be political. Yeah. But it is also political to a certain group of people, right?
Yeah, no, so, I mean, thinking about that, like this, I just happen to be a political body. I just happen to be, you know, racialized in
societies made us political in our bodies. We didn't just come out and be like,
exactly.
No.
And so, like, is that in some ways, if you don't embrace it, are you not really embracing self, right? At least within this context, right? And so, I this next image that I want to kind of talk about is another powerhouse in the art world. And so this is an image that I engage with towards the end of my book. This is Simone Lee Sentinel, and this was displayed at the Venice Biennale. And wonderful thing about this moment, and about this piece, and about her show, this was another version of what I had seen in New Orleans, that first image, right? But this one had more context, and it was more understandable in terms of all of the other pieces that were in the show. Right, and what became incredible about this show is she became the first Black woman ever to win the grand prize at the Venice Biennale. And so we have this incredible moment in art history that occurred through this piece and through the other pieces. I wonder, what does that mean to you, thinking about like being celebrated on the highest stages in the art world, and how do you engage with that?
I'm still figuring that out. It's one of those things I'm definitely still figuring out, only because I can be kind of more of an introvert person. I'm a homebody in that sense. So like thinking about my work, even on those biggest stages or in that type of spotlight, it's one of those things I'm like still learning to accept, and to even like, I'm still learning to celebrate myself in those small ways sometimes. So it's kind of hard to like think about it further in that retrospect, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think in some ways we were having this conversation earlier, like, well, what is the goal of art? Is it the audience, or is it an expression that you just feel compelled to share?
I think it's a continuous expression of self, but a continuous, like my art for me is a continuous journey of learning about myself and my history and my family and just things that I might have been introduced to slightly but not ever fully knowing about. Just like with when I decided to, like we talked about before, like when I decided to lock my hair, I did not know anything much about the history of black hair outside of what I was taught growing up and outside of just Madam C.J. Walker, which they just teach you briefly, and that's all I really knew. So that's why, like, for me, a lot of it just comes from me. My work is a lot of it is just me exploring self, and therefore putting that out into the world for other people to also relate to or reflect from. And I hope most people also have a more look at my work and feel maybe inspired to reflect on their own selves, but also give you a little bit of education on the other in that sense. Because I also get people of color who didn't know a lot of things I'm talking about in my work as well. So that's where like the educational part might come in for them. But for people who don't look like us, I think it's also a nice like bridge as far as like, this is who we are, this is where we come from, like we're proud of it, I'm proud of it, and you can either accept it or not.
So tell us what you learned about yourself. You know, what did you learn in these pieces? Because I mean, this piece, what I love about it, immediately I see that you're engaging with art history, right? And some people may not see that, some people may not, but then like I see the African elements here, but then like there's the hair. So tell me what you learned, one, from like creating this piece, and then what do you want people to receive?
So these masks were all inspired from different masks that I found populated in my own ancestry DNA. So I did the like ancestry DNA kit, and I found all these different regions of Africa that were populated for me, which were mostly West African, so like Nigeria, Cameroon, Congo, places like that. So I was looking at masks that are traditional from those regions in connection with the spiritual meaning that black hair has had over time. And black hair spiritually has been known to be the highest point in our body, and therefore the closest our closest point of communication to the gods. So kind of combining those two things, and then at first I was making these all just like wall reliefs. At first they used to be wall reliefs, and then I really wanted to build them into something wearable to bring out into the world. At one point, I don't think I have the footage anymore, but at one point I wore the more colorful one out in the streets around Philly for a bit. Okay. So that was a nice little practice run for them, but also for one of my opening shows, I had a few of my friends wear the mask and walk around the space, but they engaged with people as if they normally would. So they were acting like they didn't even have the mask on. It's just like, this is my hair, this is who I am, and I'm in this space. So I really, again, like not intentionally being political, but in that sense, in the performance as yes, being kind of political and taking up that space, because I'm just thinking about black hair in the workplace, black hair in spaces that most black people might not feel like they have access to, or things like that.
So tell us too, you know, for those who may be the uninitiated, what pieces are you engaging with in art history here?
I don't remember the name of the painting.
That's fine.
But it is that old painting of like the farmer and the wife in front of their farm with the, I think he might have a glass of, American God. Yeah. And I think it's so we have a cup of lemonade there in a break.
Yeah.
So we wanted to play on that, but also play with just us reclaiming that kind of history in a sense. So we wanted to kind of take that and then make it our own in that sense with this. Yeah.
So I'm gonna go to the next image here to think about reclamation, and what that means in terms of artistic practice and how valuable that is, or in some ways how potentially injurious is it in terms of maybe going down a different path that is inspired by whiteness versus blackness? Like, do I have to engage with whiteness to produce art? And so this piece here, anyone ever been to South Dakota? Two people? You guys have been to Mount Rushmore, anyone? All right. Have you been to the Crazy Horse Memorial? Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. We got some people here. Two folks who have seen it. And so here's the thing. When I first saw this in, I think this was 2018 when I saw this, I went there specifically to see the Crazy Horse Memorial. But when you arrive in Rapid City, which is the city that you're likely going to fly into to go to Mount Rushmore, you are inundated with the imagery of U.S. presidents. And so nothing is really telling you to go to Crazy Horse. There's no real signs to be like, hey, go see this. It's all the iconography of America. And so when I talk to a Native artist, you kind of mentioned this in your introduction, hey, like, how do Native people feel about this notion? So this is the face of the Crazy Horse Memorial, which is going to be 10 times bigger than Mount Rushmore, and it won't be finished in our lifetimes because one, they don't get public funding for it, and as you can imagine, there's a number of people who may not want to see that happen. And so my question to that artist and to you is, what is that relationship like, right? I talked to an artist, a Native artist. She was like, look, I don't think this is right. I don't think we should desecrate our mountains just because they did, because they put their presidents on our mountains. Do we have to put our heroes there? Is that really going to address the harm that has been caused to us? And so I wonder how you think about those things when you engage with your art, right? You're pulling from all of these kind of African cosmologies, you're pulling from Black American stories, but how are you also potentially engaging with whiteness?
Well, a lot of the ideas probably start with a more white concept in that sense. So, for example, I didn't get into quilting until I was with a predominantly white group of quilters, and that made me go oh, there's a whole Black side of history to this craft. So that made me just go down that rabbit hole. So a lot of times I think about it in parallels in the sense. So it's there's this one side of history that's very whitewashed American history, and I always kind of what my thought process is normally I'll see something like that or read or something like that, and then it's just but what about the Black side of this? But how is this related to African American history and Black culture and things like that? And then that just will start a domino effect of questions and research. So it's always kind of taking this and then okay, but what's that look like on the side of things, and how am I relating myself to it and what I've experienced in that way.
Which I think is dope. Which I think really, in many ways, is what art should do, right? How do you situate yourself, not just within the art world, but within the larger world, and which is what history should be about, right? Students are often well, history, I don't get it, it's boring. History is about this recitation of facts, and it's actually not true. Histories are stories, and how do you find yourself in these stories? I don't know if we're out of time here.
Yeah, we're just about out of time, but we do have a few minutes for a Q&A, a short Q&A. If the audience would like to participate and ask a few questions from our guests here, please.
Here's a question over here. Yeah, please.
I saw that your book starts off with a quote from Alice Walker, and of course with DeJeonge's work, it made me think about the story Everyday Use, right? Where we have that, I don't know if you know the story, DeJeonge, but there's a quilt in the story, right? And there's this push and pull between is it art or is it for everyday use? And I wonder about that with thinking about your art. Where does this kind of become this commodification too of history and culture, and I think that relates back to sort of your point about that idea of art through a white lens. How do we make those choices?
Well, it's interesting because you said that. So wait, I'm gonna go back to a couple of slides. Because you talk about use. So with my Tignan Law quilt, was probably my best example to respond to that. As far as going by everyday use and the kind of coexistence of something being borderline art and everyday use. So this quilt is made completely out of worn head wraps and headscarves and bonnets of friends and family. Because there was a law in the 1700s where African American women were forced to cover their hair in public because it lessened the seduction of the white male or the white gaze. And in turn, over time, we took that and made it our own. We reclaimed it as far as like we started wrapping our head wraps in ways that looked like hats and resembled hats and things like that. And then over time, I started thinking about that law, I started thinking about the everyday use we now have of the hair wrap and the bonnet and how it's such a prominent thing in our hair care routine and how we maintain ourselves, right? Like I've had friends who like were like, I'm not giving you my good scarf. Like you cannot, like, I'm sorry, I cannot donate to this project. Because they're like, I had this scarf for 50 years, like it's no way. So it's like, I started thinking about that in relation to like this very white law that was invented against us, and taking something that's an everyday use like our scarf and our bonnet, but putting it into this form of a quilt to kind of tell this narrative and this story of how we reclaimed this material, this thing. And I'm thinking about the women who have cried in these scarves, cooked in these scarves, argued in these scarves, you know, had babies in these bonnets. There's even a baby bonnet in here, like baby's first bonnet with like a crayon mark somewhere in the middle. So there's like this, I have like this very general feel, like I was saying before, that comes from like this white idea or white concept, but then our reclamation of it.
Yeah, can I answer that too? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think that's a great answer. I want to jump to an image that we didn't get to, but I think this is one of the last images in my book, one of the last places I go to. And this image is called Rumors of War by Kehinde Wiley. And anyone from Richmond?
But I've seen it.
Okay, you've seen it?
I've seen it, yeah.
So if you're from Virginia, if you're from Richmond had the interesting distinction of being the former Confederacy, the capital of the Confederacy, right? And because of that, the history there, they had an avenue called Monument Avenue, and it was an incredibly long strip of Confederate monuments that were removed, thankfully, after, unfortunately, the murder of George Floyd. And so what has happened in Richmond, they decided to go a step further, right? They said, hey, look, we're not just going to take these down, we're going to erect something else. And so the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts commissioned this statue, and this is called Rumors of War, and this is right out front of the museum. And if you walk through Richmond, you walk down the street, you see all of these old pedestals, right? They're no longer, the statues are no longer there. And then you come up on this, you're like, oh, this is a different space now. And so if you can kind of see here, this is a black man with locks on a horse, taking the equestrian posture of all of those Confederates. He got some Nike boots here, if you could zoom in here. And so he looks like a contemporary black man, right? And so that is that space. That is that question of reclamation. That is that notion of how do we kind of own the space that we're in and kind of reclaim it and create other works of art like this. And so I think that's a part of our process, right? To be here situated, in this hemisphere, in American context, it is important to embrace what that means to be an American, and to embrace that really means to embrace how we got to America. And so I think it's always about that conversation. I never want to not have that conversation when people are asking me about art or what I'm trying to create or what it means to be an American.
Okay, so I noticed there's a lot of synthetic hair, especially braiding hair in your work. Thinking of the history of, especially, I know there have been pieces of, let's say, pillows stuffed with the hair of slaves, and I was wondering if that is possibly something you've ever thought of doing any abstraction of or subverting in your art, since I know, our natural hair has been used to further dehumanize and commodify.
Well, I am now. But yeah, I think about those things. So like even with this quilt, thank you for going to this. So even with this quilt, this was actually the first quilt I made ever. Because when I was with that group of quilters and I started thinking about the history of quilts and African American history, I started thinking about how quilts were used along the Underground Railroad, right, as a guidance to runaways or escaped slaves, to help them reach liberation safely, right? And then simultaneously, I'm finding I was researching how at a point in time how slaves would braid their hair would represent maps or messages to escape enslavement. So taking those two things, I often will bring them together. So the more I learn things like that, the more I'm kind of bridging these like parallels of stories. So I wanted to create this plaited cartography because I wanted it to honor both the idea of hair being used as a means of survival and also quilts being used as a guidance of that survival in that sense. And I love like ideas like you just like, you know, stuffing a pillowcase with hair. It's just like, it's this very, what seems like a very like, the words are taping me, but like our hair just seems like something that people don't really think about. And it's such an identifier for us as people of color. But the more I'm able to learn of how much our ancestors were using just this natural thing that grows out of our hair for survival. It's just something so beautiful and moves me so much. And it's just something I always want to continue to put into my work because it is our DNA and hair is DNA, right? And it's just always kind of like my little extra touch in that way. And it's something I'm going to probably continue to explore over time.
Can I add one small thing to that? So you guys saw Sinners? Anybody saw Sinners? You heard of it? Won a couple Oscars. One thing that really moved me outside of the speeches at the Oscars was Ryan Coogler's hair. I don't know if you guys noticed this. It definitely got me a little emotional. He was braiding his hair. He braided his hair, and in the braid, in the messaging, he had a guitar there to honor the blues, which is what he was trying to do in the film, which is what he's trying to do for Blackness. And it was just like, man, that is so important on that stage to be able to have that image, to have that symbol in his hair.
But showing that artistry of black hair at the Oscars, like, come on. It's just so unapologetically black, but also just putting, it's like this small thing, what seems like a small thing, of putting us in this very white space, right? Like, how often do you see that? And I was just, I was blown away when I like first noticed it watching
Like,
it.
wait, is that a guitar? Like,
Right.
okay.
It's like you see the guitar on the side, and then I was like, crazy. I can go.
Floored. So I think we're getting clapped up here.
Yeah, we're out of time, but there, in sort of the spirit of capitalism, if you haven't purchased your copy of No Income Tent, please do so. The bookstore is there with copies for purchase, and our guests would more than happy engage in further conversation if you so happen to want to have that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, guys.